Welcome back. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register, and every week we try to bring you news and information you can use on your real estate transactions. And today I'm talking with Kristy Santelia from North American Title, and I brought her back in. You've heard her before on the show. We did a big show right before October 3rd that was all about the new changes that are taking place, the TILA RESPA changes that the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, is regulating. And these are huge changes that came about because of the Dodd-Frank changes, and it's just been an evolutionary process for years, it seems like. But these were big changes for the real estate industry, probably the biggest changes we've had in about 25 years. It was a really big change on October 3rd. But so many people had been preparing for it that it hasn't been a huge problem, we hope. So we brought Kristi in to talk a little bit about that. Kristy Santelia, she is the Executive Vice President and the Houston Division Manager for North American Title. They're a preferred lender over at Register Real Estate Advisors. And so I wanted to get her perspective now that October 3rd has happened and people are starting to close under these new rules. I want to know, what are you seeing that's different, or are you seeing anything different? So we got a lot to talk about today.
We do. It's interesting. I think the biggest shift right now is that we're actually toggling between the old HUD-1 disclosure and then the new CFPB, the closing disclosure. I think the hardest part is trying to work between two platforms. But we are starting to see, probably mid-October, we started seeing our first TRID, TILA RESPA integrated disclosure closings, and it's actually gone pretty smoothly. So
what was the big change? Just to remind everybody, or if they didn't see that big show that we did, just remind them, what is the big TILA RESPA? What does the change involve?
Sure. So the change being prior to October 3rd, 2015, closings would have the initial good faith estimate and the initial truth in lending when they first applied for the loan for the initial disclosures. And then we would close using the HUD-1 settlement statement and then the final truth in lending. Okay. CFPB implemented the TILA RESPA integrated disclosures, which now consists of the loan estimate at the beginning at application, essentially, and that is essentially a combination of the old GFE and truth in lending. And we're now closing using the closing disclosure rather than the final truth in lending and the HUD-1 settlement statement.
And most people are familiar with the HUD-1 because if they've closed on a property, they know they have to get that to the accountant.
Correct.
For their taxes, and that's what they use. If they bought a home to live in, they have to use that to go to the post office and get their keys. So they're familiar with that HUD-1 usually. They've used it for several things. They have to take it to the school district sometimes, to get their kids enrolled. So there's different things that they do with it. So they're pretty familiar with it. So that's going to look different in the future. If they're closing with a lender,
it will look different, and they can use the new closing disclosure that the lender circulates to them prior to closing. The good thing about the closing disclosure is that they have to receive it at least 3 days prior to closing. So we have buyers and realtors and entire, everyone involved with the transaction walking into closing being completely prepared for what they're walking into. It's a great change.
The way it should have always been.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about it from a lender perspective, because I know lenders have been working up to these changes. I mean, they had to integrate new computer systems and new, all sorts of new systems to work by. So how are you seeing lenders performing under these new regulations? What's different?
Well, most of the lenders have indicated that they want to prepare the closing disclosure, which is
because they're responsible for it.
Exactly.
Now.
Ultimately, they're liable, so they want to have the control over that. I think a lot of the lenders are realizing that it's much more time consuming to prepare the disclosure than they had anticipated. So I think a lot of my lending clients are experiencing maybe some staffing issues and things like that, just because it is a much more time consuming process than what they anticipated. So
they didn't realize what all y'all were doing over there.
I know. It's a validation of sorts. But, some of the lenders have reached out to us, and at least in this interim time frame, requested that we go ahead and prepare the closing disclosure and that they would manage the disclosure timeline process, which I think is the big liability issue there, because they can review and approve a disclosure.
Right, no matter who makes it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so from the lender perspective, they're kind of going back and forth between whether they're going to prepare it or whether you guys are going to prepare it. But your big lenders like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they were ready, right?
They are preparing them. Yes,
Yeah.
they lots of software integrations and things like that I think kind of ease that process.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about it from the consumer perspective. The people that you see closing at the closing table, do they even notice anything different?
They're happy and they know their figures prior to closing. And, other than that, I don't think a lot of them have a whole lot. Most people don't buy a substantial number of homes in their lifetime.
Yeah.
So for most of them, it's, they're just kind of here for the process and making sure that they get their documents over to the lender in a timely manner,
Right.
and then they show up to sign whatever they're presented and they move on. But
Yeah.
I think the most positive change is that for those TRID closings, we're not seeing surprises at the closing table.
Well, and let me just tell you that if they do have to push back the closing day, their realtor is going to hear about it, not you.
Yes.
The title company.
Well, the realtor and the lender. Yeah. So we're just kind of along for the ride at that point. And, the good news, too, is that when we first started talking about all these changes, it was determined that, there were going to be no changes at the closing table. And if anything changed, we were going to have to push the closing and redisclose. Right. Actually, most lenders are using that 1/8 of a point tolerance, and most things fall within that tolerance level. So any kind of small tweaks that we have to make,
it's not a big deal.
Hasn't pushed anything for us this far.
Well, it has to be something big,
Yeah.
something big financially, change-wise, right? To change it. Okay, so let's talk about you guys. Y'all were prepared. Title company was ready.
We were prepared.
Y'all were probably, if we had changed everything back in August instead of pushing it to October 3rd, you guys probably would have been ready.
Yes, we were prepared for August 1st, definitely. And then that didn't happen. And, we even had all of at North American Title, we had our associates come in on a Saturday where we had no distractions. Phones weren't ringing. Nothing was going on. And we could sit and solely focus on the task at hand and learning the new software and exactly how the disclosure works. So I think that day of training, uninterrupted, was so valuable for us.
And you guys, the title company was out there, y'all were doing all the training and teaching classes for months before October 3rd to get the realtors ready.
Yes, I've been teaching classes on the new disclosures since May. So we were, working for that August 1st, and that didn't happen, and teaching classes all over the city. So my hope is that between my efforts and the other efforts of those teaching classes, that hopefully we have educated our industry as a whole here in Houston.
Well, Wells Fargo did a survey and found that half the realtors out there don't even know about the TILA RESPA changes.
It's a scary thing.
Isn't that scary? And that's why it's so important that consumers choose a realtor that's educated, that is no doubt a realtor, not just a real estate agent with a license, and that they're keeping up with their continuing education and, staying ahead of everything.
Right. And it's the job hasn't necessarily shifted or changed, but there are a lot more demands, I think, on what a realtor would need to do in a transaction now as far as managing the process than they had to do before.
Yeah. And a lot of it they probably should have always been doing, but you really have to stay on top of the transaction every step of the way. And that's hard sometimes because all your clients are in the pipeline at different phases. This person's looking at a home, this person's going to closing, this person is trying to get pre-approved, this person we're waiting on, we're negotiating inspections, and then this one you're trying to just get them through, waiting on title to get things prepared, waiting on the lender to get docs ready so that they can close next week. So you've got all these different clients in all these different phases, and of course your client only thinks they're the only one that you deal with, so I think it's just realtors have to learn how to manage all those different steps, and maybe a lot of them hadn't been doing that before.
Exactly.
So, yeah, there's a lot more than just finding the house.
There is. That's the fun part.
That's the fun part. That's right. The work for us begins after you find the house. So.
Right.
All right. And anything else that you want to say about TILA RESPA and the changes that happened that you've seen, good, bad? Think it's all going well?
I think it's a great thing. I think no surprises at the closing table will result in more referral business for realtors because people aren't disappointed at the last minute, because ultimately it all is a reflection of, what the realtor did for them. So hopefully it will mean more business for you guys. But overall, I think it's been a really positive change.
All right. Thank you, Kristy Santelia from North American Title. We appreciate what you do over there at the title company. You guys have a lot of hard work ahead of you with these changes, but it sounds like you're doing a great job, so we appreciate you. And we'll be right back here on Houston Real Estate Radio after a word from our sponsors.